Welcome to the Hedgineer Podcast with your host, Michael Watson.
Hedgineer.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Hedgineer Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Watson, where we talk about AI, technology, and data within hedge funds, asset managers, and prop trading. Today we have a little bit different episode where I'm just recording from my place here in sunny South Beach. Spend most of the week up in Manhattan. We try to come down here on the weekends. And reflecting on a couple of the thoughts that I've had over the course of the last couple of weeks and just sharing it with you. Today I was at a lunch and it was with a person that was new to the hedge fund space, and they had heard that I had started my own company called Hedgineer, and we're doing really well. We're growing very quickly, and asked how much I enjoy working for my own business opposed to working within a corporate environment. And with the expectation, I was going to say, oh, I absolutely love it, or it's so different. But what I actually said was, it feels like the same thing that I've been doing for the last 10 years. I just happen to now own a little bit more or a lot more of the company and deal with a little bit more diversity of problems. But generally speaking, the job feels very similar to what I've been doing for over a decade now, starting with my time as a software engineer prior to joining Citadel, and then joining Citadel and working with investment teams and risk managers on how to really understand how you use technology, data, and AI to be able to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts. How do you integrate a risk system in a portfolio and positions management system with a research system that maps all of the discrete and disparate data sources across the global economy into a single platform where all of that data is joined, normalized, and provided in a single set of solutions together. I spent a ton of time doing that. And honestly, that's now what I spend all of my time trying to do. And so in some sense, it doesn't really feel any different. And I think part of the reason why it doesn't feel any different is to give credit to my previous employer at Citadel. I think they did a great job of training the next generation of entrepreneurs by having a environment that I think did focus on meritocracy. If you have a great idea, everyone else should be able to push back on it, validate it. But if it's the best thing for you to be doing, there's a good chance that your boss probably agrees with that. Their boss probably agrees with that. All the way up to Ken probably would agree with it. And so it's not that somebody else is telling you to do something. It's that you're doing what the best thing for you to be doing to help solve a problem and add value, in the same way that if you were just your small company within that environment, we're making decisions around. And I think it was Eric Ries wrote a book called The Lean Startup that uses the term intrapreneurship opposed to entrepreneurship, where you're solving problems in a very similar environment as a startup founder, but you're doing it within a large organization, and it's still demands innovation and problem solving, the same skill sets that you would do as an entrepreneur, but you do it as an intrapreneur. And I think that really good organizations are able to foster that sense of innovation and meritocracy in order to enable their workforce to provide the best level solution and on behalf of their clients. And so now that I've been in the space for a while, and we're starting to see some really good growth, there's not as much of a difference between what it was like working for somebody else and solving problems versus working for a company that I own myself. And sometimes the idolization that we have of entrepreneurs within society doesn't give a fair acknowledgement of credit to teams and groups of people that collectively solve problems together to do incredible things. And sometimes if you're a member of that team, you have this false sense of underachievement because you weren't an entrepreneur yourself, even though you could be very well compensated and solving incredibly hard problems, moving the needle, pushing the boundaries. And then you feel as though you're not actually achieving greatness because you're not a quote unquote entrepreneur. And I think that a lot of people have a over fascination with entrepreneurship to the point where they don't properly acknowledge the incredible accomplishments and achievements that you can make within a company, especially a company that helps foster meritocracy and entrepreneurship. But the one element that you will oftentimes find within a large organization where you're trying to be a quote unquote intrapreneur is the concept of IP ownership. And I think that in the age of AI, IP ownership and having clear assignment of that ownership will become more and more valuable. And the need for domain experts that really understand a problem, can articulate it very clearly, and then are able to then work with an AI-based solution to be able to create a scalable solution that they can then provide multiple different clients opposed to providing just one client via a W-2 contract is going to be something that will foster more innovation and usage of AI within the enterprise. And I guess I'll go a little bit deeper on that. When you work for a company as a W-2 employee, there's oftentimes an assignment of IP ownership that you will agree to when you first started the company and not think about it again. And that IP ownership is generally pretty permissive on the behalf of the company. And it'll include everything that you create throughout the course of your employment with the company, including any byproducts of work, Excel models, code, but it also includes email transcripts, the spoken word that's going to be more and more transcribed on behalf of the company, a lot of the ideas that you create. And those ideas, that expertise, while you're employed as a W-2, is IP ownership of that company. And with AI, the unlocking of that IP ownership, once it can be digitized, which a lot of it already is, but a lot of the spoken conversations we have throughout the day that represent our deep domain knowledge that we feel that we have will accrue to the owner of that IP, and that is going to be larger organizations, assuming that the most talented people within those organizations remain a W-2 like employee. However, when you transition from a full-time employee to a contractor, potentially through a W-9 or through an LLC, you can start to play with IP ownership clauses, and you can get a lot more flexibility on that. And what that presents for the domain expert that has worked in a field for the last 20 years for the same company, and they may not be an expert in one system, but they are an expert when three systems together have to be integrated, to be able to leverage that domain expertise for their own benefit, using their own IP opposed to within the W-2 model. And so the movement for me that was the biggest unlock is realizing that I could do the same work. I have to maybe do a little bit more in terms of the sales side and generate new business, but I can take my deep domain expertise in the way that technology, data, and AI is applied to the hedge fund industry and transfer that domain knowledge that I've developed over the years, and then start spending time in creating my own IP that reflects what I know good looks like and put that onto my company's balance sheet. And so that differentiator between a W-2 versus a W-9 or your own company, where you start developing your own unique IP, is a huge difference. But without AI, that transfer of IP ownership is not inherently as scalable, especially for service-based companies. Historically, it's been very true for SaaS-based companies, because in a SaaS model, you can solve a problem, codify it, iterate with the client and make sure that it solves a problem very effectively, and then throw it into the cloud, offer a subscription-based service, and then offer that SaaS product to multiple different customers that are looking to solve the same problem. And you could do it for a fraction of the cost if they had to build out that SaaS system themselves. And so generally, SaaS models have been focused on semi-complex problem spaces. And if a company could, they would ideally use a SaaS model for everything, assuming that SaaS model is, in order to replace like their cost of labor, assuming that SaaS model isn't a core competency. And there's a lot of roles within an organization that are not necessarily core competencies of that company. They have to hire people and experts to be able to solve that problem, because there's just not a SaaS model that solves that problem effectively. And the people that are experts don't really have a scalable solution to be able to create a SaaS product based off of their domain expertise. So now going back to where companies employ talented individuals that may not be a domain expert in just one topic, but collectively know 2 or 3 topics at a very high level and how those different problem spaces integrate with each other. There is a scalable business model if those individuals can then clearly articulate the optimal way that 3 different problem spaces need to be combined together, have clarity of thought on the features that the solution needs to be able to solve for, as well as edge cases. And an AI model can then take that clarity of thought and very well described understanding and nuanced expertise of that problem and help that individual create a scalable piece of software very customized to their domain expertise. And if the individual that is describing that problem is also the owner of the IP that becomes the input to that the input to that model, that there is now a new avenue for a set of entrepreneurs that have deep domain expertise in very niche systems to very quickly take that expertise and turn it into a scalable business that can then disrupt that small piece of the world that they know really well and create a scalable business on top of it. And I think that the transition from W-2 employees that really know a space very well into W-9 and entrepreneurs is something that is only going to accelerate, especially coming out of COVID. Pre-COVID, we all worked in the same office. We were expected to see our coworkers every day, and it would be the exception to have someone that you only meet via Zoom calls or you've never physically met in person. But COVID flipped that model upside down, where everyone suddenly became accustomed to interacting with remote workers. And that psychological shift in the enterprise opens up a new avenue for W-9 and service-based entrepreneurs to integrate with existing teams remotely, and having a very blurred line. Is this person W-2? Is this person working remote? We don't really know, but they're solving valuable problems. So let's just continue to solve those problems. So that avenue is suddenly opened up in a post-COVID world where a lot of people are working remote. And suddenly you have people that have a deep domain expertise that can maybe take 2 jobs at once, maybe 3 jobs at once. And you see in some subreddit communities like Overworked, where people are taking on multiple different jobs at the same time, and their employers aren't necessarily know about it. And I think that is one, just deceiving anyone, I think is wrong, even if it is something you don't ask, don't tell. But I think more importantly, the biggest risk there for organizations is IP leakage. If you do sign an agreement on who owns IP and what you can and can't do, and you or do something in a knowledgeable way that jeopardizes that IP assignment and that IP ownership, then it would be irresponsible for you, as well as potentially damaging to the company that you're working for, to put them in a situation where there is IP leakage. But outside of that, the conception of the overworked community, I have zero personal problem with, and I think it's actually great. I think the onus is on the company to be able to define, how do we want to evaluate the quality of work product that we are getting out of the current employees, and incentivize those that are doing great, and probably cycle out the people that aren't doing as well, to give opportunities for somebody new to come in. And if the people that are doing great happen to be having 2 or 3 jobs at the same time, great. If people are overworked and then they're underperforming within an organization and they're unfortunately let go, that's fine. That's okay. I think that there is a healthy sense of adaptation that companies have to go through, where certain cells die off and certain cells are flourish. Certain adaptation behaviors change throughout the course of an organization's life. And I'm talking about from a biological perspective. You generally think of like evolution happens over the course of multiple generations, but there are a lot of biological adaptations that happen while an organization is still alive, or an organism is still alive, that help it continue to improve. So like immune system adaptations are when you get inoculated potentially with a virus, so that you would then have an immunology response to it. You'll have behavioral adaptations where like bad things happen and you then respond and learn from them. There's even like phenotype plasticity, where an organization can change its phenotype based off response to environment. So bad things can happen and you have to be able to respond to them. And organizations, by being able to have some level of healthy turnover and employee base, is that organization's ability to healthily respond to success and failure within the organization, and identify the best people and talent and have that bubble up to the top. But in that environment, going back to the concept of overworked, I actually think that is that model, and this model of service-based employees, that is going to be the next segue of AI adoption within the enterprise, because those employees that are working for multiple different companies, whether it's a W-9 or a W-2 that an employer doesn't necessarily know about, their incentive to become as productive as possible is higher than any individual incentive working for only one company. And so as they're adopting more AI tools to be able to get faster, respond to emails in an automated way, systematically deploy, test, build code, automate the transition from creating a Figma into an actual document, they're using AI because they're incredibly incentivized to use AI as their productivity increases. So as their productivity increases, they can potentially take on more jobs and offer a lower cost of their services or employment within the enterprise. And then if you're a manager or somebody making employment decisions, you suddenly see these semi-service-based companies popping up, run by domain experts solving a specific problem, but offering the same quality work output as your existing employee base, but a fraction of the cost. It's going to be really difficult to say, like, oh, actually, you know what? Maybe I don't need a full-time person for this role. I can use this fractional expert that is also providing AI-based solutions or agents on top of their work offering to just automate and integrate within my existing company. And I'm getting a great product out of it. I don't have to worry about retention. I don't have to worry about the HR issues. Now, there are other things to have to worry about, but this wasn't my core competency to begin with. So I would love to be able to suddenly have a SaaS or service-based model that I can apply to very specific domains within the enterprise and only be hiring people that are focused on pushing my core competency even further. And having employment models or company W-9 or startup models that enable that service provider that has worked within maybe a tier 1 or a tier 2, like a tier 2 or a tier 3 supplier in the automotive industry that is an expert on just-in-time supply chain models, just-in-time accounting models, how maybe an SAP ERP system works with a nuanced type of accounting system, and how that works with like a managing the different calendar schedules and deployment schedules, like that. Just maybe this one specific deep domain just for air conditioning systems or just for a specific product. Let them start their own company, clearly articulate the wealth of knowledge that they've acquired over the last 20 years to an AI system, allow them to own the IP that was built off of and the output of that AI system, and then give them an opportunity to be able to drive more value, not just for their one employer, but for the many different companies that they could help make that information supply chain problem more efficient at. And let that value accrue to the individual that has that expertise. And using AI to create SaaS-like margins for service-based jobs that require domain expertise and strong knowledge on is what I see as the biggest unlock for employees within large organizations that have been working for a really long time and want to say, hey, maybe this is my opportunity to make a jump and build my own company. To do that in a scalable and economically productive and beneficial way right now. And I think that those entrepreneurs that are coming out of companies focusing on very nuanced problem spaces, trying to use AI to create solutions on top of the domain knowledge, are going to be the Trojan horse that are going to go back into enterprise and drive the adoption of AI solutions beyond just chat. Because the reason why everyone focuses on chat right now in order to solve or leverage AI within the enterprise is because that's what they saw first. ChatGPT comes out, they have a great chat interface, and then everyone assumes that chat is the silver bullet once you adopt RAG models on top of enterprise data to be able to solve all problems in the world with AI. But I think, one, it's a lazy assumption. Two, I think it is an unimaginative one, because there's a lot of very hard problems that need to be solved wherever you look that chat just doesn't necessarily do well. Now, I think chat's here to stay. Human language is the way in which we communicate with each other, and having a interface that I can clearly articulate my problems to and then have the automated execution of that happen is a great feature. But there's so many other steps along the way where AI can be effectively used in getting incentive models for people that have worked really hard for a really long time to be able to step out of the enterprise, develop their own IP, and then build AI models on top of that, and then use that knowledge and output to be able to add value back to the enterprise and have that value accrual go more to them, is a world I'm really excited about. I hope you are too. And I was really glad I was able to get that off of my chest. So with that, I want to thank everyone for tuning in to the Hedgineer Podcast. Again, I'm your host, Michael Watson, and we look forward to continuing to push out more content, thought leadership ideas. Normally, it's very specific to the hedge fund industry, but sometimes it's nice to step outside of your box and just think and talk about stuff that you really care about and are passionate about it. And that's why we're here in the first place. So thanks everyone for tuning in. Talk to you later.
Thank you for joining. See you soon.
Hedgineer.